Changes in business are constant, and changes in the choices of business people spend their money at are also constant. Throughout the years, many of our favorite stores and restaurants come and go, and some are much smaller than they used to be. So much so that one must even question if they'll continue to exist at all. These are the endangered and near extinct restaurant chains of America, Part 2. So first we're going to start off with the endangered category, and the first one I have on this list is TCBY, the country's best yogurt. Its locations at its peak in 1994 were 2,801, while today at the beginning of 2024 they have just 139 locations, good for just 4.9% of their former peak. TCBY started in 1981 in Arkansas, and it grew fast, growing to 100 locations and going public in just 3 years. They mastered the franchise model, and while their success continued throughout the 90s and into the early 2000s, they would undergo a long and slow decline, largely due to the fact that there were just many similar options that would grow in the time since their peak. Take a competitor like Menchie's. They didn't even exist until 2007, and today they're bigger than TCBY, with over 540 locations. Really, it just seems like a company that just can't keep up with the competition, was the first adopter in a market that was probably oversized and eventually just deflated to what it is today. Next we have Bennigan's, which is a Irish pub-themed chain. At its peak it had an estimated 300 locations. Today it has just 24, or 8% of its peak. 15 of those 24 locations are international, and only 9 are left in the US, all of which are either in the Midwest or in Texas. So Bennigan's began in 1976 through the Pillsbury Corporation. However, they would only be a part of it in its early history. From the early 90s to 2008, the company would undergo sort of a really slow decline. However, in 2008, it would really pick up. 150 locations would close all at once that year in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy filing. Really here, there just wasn't anything that was exclusive to this restaurant. There wasn't anything that could really make people want to go there over anywhere else, really. And now they're nearly extinct in the US and endangered overall. Next we have Tony Roma's restaurant. This was a chain sit-down restaurant, and it was focused on more higher priced kind of dinner type items. At its peak in 2001, it had 241 locations. Today it has just 59 and only 9 in the United States, resulting in just 24.5% of its peak locations remaining. Tony Roma's would begin in 1972, founded by the man himself, Tony Roma, and it would also eventually be co-owned by one of the former owners of the Dallas Cowboys, Clint Murchison Jr. It would grow slowly but steadily from the 70s to the 90s. However, ownership would change, and by the early 2000s, the decline would begin. Heavy debt that the company took on in the late 90s and early 2000s was the first and foremost reason for this. And over the years, the company has basically just fizzled out in the US, with those locations just being spread out all over the country. Today, according to their own admission, they're really more of an international company, and I doubt, given the uncertainty of sit-down restaurants in today's world, that they'll reach anything close to what they were, locations-wise. And next we have our near extinct category, and we're going to start off with Country Kitchen. This country and home-style sit-down restaurant had its peak in the 1970s at 340 restaurants, and today it just has 19 remaining, resulting in just 5.6% of its former peak still existing today. And those locations are mostly concentrated in Middle America, however there are a few in the western United States. Country Kitchen began in Cincinnati, Ohio, all the way back in 1939. Over the decades as it grew, it pretty much became exclusively a franchised restaurant. Country Kitchen's decline would come heavily in the 2000s decade. I couldn't find a lot specifically on its decline. However, there's generally just sort of a aging out of restaurants like this. If they can't stay relevant, they pretty much just fall behind because they can't compete with places with a lot more cash like Bob Evans or Cracker Barrel. And once the decline starts, really everything stops. Renovations stop, new ideas stop, and it just goes into a staleness that is really hard for a company to get out of. And lastly, but not least, per many comments on the last video, we have Rax Roast Beef. This fast food restaurant had just over 500 locations at its peak in the 1980s, but today it has just 5 locations, all located in Ohio and Kentucky, resulting in just 0.9% of its former peak remaining. This company has been around since the 1960s. It was first called Jack's, then Rax Roast Beef just a few years into its history, and then finally Rax Roast Beef just over a decade into its history. And really it was just kind of a different version of Arby's, and actually both Arby's and Jack's would start only 3 years apart in the same state of Ohio. And with Rax, what happened was they just tried to be something that they weren't, offering a wide range of food that had nothing to do with roast beef. It would have an early 1990s bankruptcy, and at the end of the decade there were only 60 stores left, becoming a shell and a fraction of its former self. Meanwhile, Arby's would thrive, and since that point, the 60 has now become just the 5 that exist today. So that is part 2 of the endangered and near extinct restaurants. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.